we know what the gospel letters said as we have them today. In other words, when we're translating the New Testament, we're translating it from 3rd century, 4th century, 2nd century documents. Okay. So we know what those words are. So your claim is the corruption happened prior to that, prior to the written word. Muhammad is saying they have the true words of God that you would need to follow. Muhammad's not writing to the 7th century.
Yes. This episode is brought to you by our Revo Report Patreon. Join our community to get first access to interviews, Bible study guides, devotionals, and prayer books for adults, youth, families, and marriages. Plus, resources on Christian living, leadership, sermon prep, exclusive Q&As, online Bible studies, and even one-on-one coaching or counseling. Visit patreon.com/Vince Revo and grow in faith and truth with us.
How is it then that he knows that they have the true words of God? In other words, you're making claims about the New Testament. It's kind of like saying, I have a map to Atlantis and you need to follow the map to Atlantis. Well, if Atlantis never existed, there can't be any map to Atlantis for you to follow. So if the true Injil we don't have, I mean, maybe Atlantis existed, but we have no idea where it is or what it is or how it looked or which way to even point our compasses. So if you say that there was a true Injil, how do you know what it is, where it is, how to get to it? But yet Muhammad says they had the true Injil. The only thing Muhammad had was the very same New Testament that you and I have right now today. How do you explain that? Is the Quran wrong in saying they had the true Injil? Or is the Quran wrong in saying that the things that the gospel does say and it contradicts? Either way, the Quran's wrong. Either way, right? And so that's a pretty big issue, I think. This is again one of the ways that we can talk to them. I've not heard anybody give me an answer to that. So
right, yeah, I think that is one of the main arguments as well that they use. And you haven't heard kind of a sufficient answer to that.
Well, what can they say? They can either say, well, we know that there was Muhammad, he had a special insight into the true Injil. Okay, maybe I'll even grant you that. But the command is for his followers, even unto today, to give certain deference and certain respect for that. So what are you giving respect to? Again, it's a map to Atlantis. It's a map to something that doesn't exist. You can't draw a map to Atlantis if you don't know where you're drawing or where you're going. So I just don't see how that's escapable. So
yeah, I agree. That's definitely. I just hit record here because I wanted to hear you. I wanted that in there.
Polemics and attacking and things like that. Some of the first things I said, I have to tell you one thing. On a Saturday morning, most guys would be sitting in front of their TV watching college football, and you're out here going door to door. I actually have to compliment you on that. I think that's an amazing way to approach your faith. I said, you must, when you knock on doors, hear a lot of reasons for why people believe the things that they do. Right? He goes, well, yeah, I guess. I said, I mean, you hear, well, my family comes from this tradition, so therefore I was baptized into that faith, or it's just what's comfortable, what makes, works for me, that kind of thing. Or I'm an American, so I have to believe in X, or all my friends go here and it makes me feel. He goes, I've heard all those too. I said, okay, can we both agree that those are actually bad reasons to believe something? In fact, I hold there's only one good reason to believe anything. And he goes, well, what's that? I said, well, if it's true. The only reason you should ever believe anything is if it's true, because beliefs have consequences and they matter, even if it's a non-threatening belief. I mean, certain beliefs can be dangerous. Some are not dangerous. Take the tradition of Santa Claus, for example. We have this tradition. We teach it to our kids, and our kids believe it. Now, it's not that they believe it on no speculation. I mean, they've got some evidence, right? They've heard it from an authority figure. I mean, the milk's drunk, the cookies are eaten, there's presence, there's some empirical data that they're working with, right? There's some evidence there. But what would you feel? How would you feel about spending 5 hours on a cross-country plane flight next to a 40-year-old man who deeply believes in Santa Claus? Would that make you uncomfortable? Not because it's dangerous, but simply because it's not true.
Mm.
So there's only one good reason to believe anything, is whether it's true. He goes, you're right. And that's why I believe in the Watchtower's understanding of the Bible. That's why I'm a follower of Jesus. And I said, okay. I said, well, let's ask, I want to understand that more, because I've done some research and I understand the Watchtower, and they've retracted certain things that they've said in the past, right? So, for example, and I'm not going to talk to you about, blood transfusions or celebrating Christmas birthdays, but they did claim that Jesus was going to come back invisibly, maybe 1878, 1914, 1918, 1925, 1940, 1975. He goes, well, you have to understand that they're just men and they can get things wrong. I said, okay, that's fine. I'll grant that. And I don't want to press that point. However, they've also made claims that stand contrary to the historic Christian faith, such as the nature of Jesus, that they identify Jesus as Michael the Archangel, whereas the historic Christian position has always been that Jesus is God and that our salvation depends on his divinity as much as anything else. So what if they're wrong there? What if in 100 years they recant on that the way they recanted on some of these other things? Well, I don't think that they're ever going to do that. Okay, but what if they did? What if they were to find that? What if I can show you from your Bible that Jesus actually is divine? What about, would you choose to believe it? And he said, I've been a witness for 17 years, and it's only through the witnesses that I have the center and the purpose for my life. And I don't think I could ever leave that. And I said, wait a minute, didn't we just agree that that's a terrible reason to believe something? And he literally went, he thought I'd played some word game on him or something like that. We made a few pleasantries and he excused himself. Okay. And so that was the conversation. I would have taken him to the John 1:3 passage that I did in the video. That would have been my next step. So it's about 8 or 10 years later, and I'm at a conference in the local area. And I tell that story on stage. Afterwards, sitting at my table, a guy comes up to me and he says, I was interested in that story that you told about that witness. You know that guy? I said, yeah, I remember. He goes, yeah, that was me. That was me 10 years ago. I'm blown away. My wife is sitting there. She'd heard this story, of course, dozens of times.
Yeah.
Her mouth is agape. And he goes, I didn't become a believer then, but it stuck with me. And it began an investigation that took maybe about 5 years, but then I had to leave the Watchtower Society because of it. And I was stunned. Usually apologetics is normally a very thankless ministry in the fact that you sow seeds, but you never normally see what happens after the fact. Actually, apologetics isn't even sowing seeds. It's just removing the rocks so that the evangelists can come in and into the fertile soil and make sure that the plants grow well. And it was just that was one of the ways that God actually blessed me to see that kind of result. And it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. So